The hierarchy is a name covering the working disciples of all degrees, and it has for hundreds of generations sought to aid humanity, and since the 15th century has steadily approached closer to the physical plane and sought to make a deeper impact on the human consciousness. As Manly P. Hall, 33rd degree Freemason and renowned expert on the subject, wrote in his book, The Secret Destiny of America, he says, "For more than 3,000 years, secret societies have labored to create the background knowledge necessary to the establishment of the enlightened democracy among the nations of the world." Now, we have to understand that Manly is speaking Masonically, because the enlightened democracy that he's referring to are the high-ranking initiates of Freemasonry. So it's a Freemasonic democracy. A democracy among Masons is what he's really talking about. And so all have continued, and they will exist as the order of the quest. He says, men bound by a secret oath to labor in the cause of a world democracy decided that in the American colonies, they would plant the roots of a new way of life. The order of the quest was set up in America before the middle of the 17th century. Franklin spoke about the order of the quest, and most of the men who worked with him in the early days of American Republic were also members. Well, members of what exactly? He continues, not only were the many of the founders of the United States government Masons, but they received aid from a secret and august body existing in Europe, which helped them to establish this country for a particular purpose known only to an initiated few. Note this secret august body will come up later in another quote. It refers to a fraternity of Masons throughout Europe. David Ovason, in his book, The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital, page 75, says, the very struggle for independence seems to have been directed by the Masonic Brotherhood, and some historians insist has even been started by them. Ralph Epperson, in his book, The New World Order, page 146, says, the Supreme Council of the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry has told the student that 13 of the 39 original signers of the Constitution were Masons. It's also interesting to note that there were 39 signers, exactly 3 times the Masonic number 13. So if you look at America today, you have all the Masonic architecture, as David Ovason, in his book, Secret Architecture of the Nation's Capital, page 124, says, in the years following the Revolution, the Masonic fraternities held ceremonial layings for such new enterprises as bridges, locks, universities, governmental buildings, state houses, memorials, and even churches. Some buildings were aligned with the stars and with the spiritual beings who ruled the stars. Jim Mars in Rule by Secrecy, page 242, says, the ongoing connective tissue between the modern and ancient secret societies has been Freemasonry, which existed as a formidable force long before certain lodges became illuminized. During the late Middle Ages, when opposition to the Holy Roman Universal Catholic Church were forced deep underground, the only organized groups able to move freely throughout Europe were the guilds of stonemasons, who maintained meeting halls and lodges in every major city. The Masons, who traced their own secret knowledge of architecture and building back to Egypt and beyond, were essential in the construction of Europe's churches and cathedrals. David Icke, in his book Tales from the Time Loop, says, if it really is the land of the free, and if, as it is claimed, anyone can really become the president, you would fairly expect that 43 presidents from George Washington to George Bush would express that genetic diversity. You're having a laugh? The presidents of the United States are as much royal dynasty as anything in Europe from whence their bloodlines came. Placing bloodline members on both sides of the American political system, the old families have guaranteed their right to the throne under the guise of democratic elections. David Icke provides a good summary in his book Tales from the Time Loop. He says, the divine right is simply the right to rule by DNA. We have a head of state in Britain to this day who is only there because of her DNA, that the whole freeloading hierarchy of royal family is structured according to a person's DNA relationship to the king or to the queen. He continues, the divine right to rule has nothing to do with divine and everything to do with the real origin of these bloodlines. They claim to descend from the gods of the ancient world. He says, the royal families have interbred incessantly with each other since ancient times because they are seeking to retain the DNA corruption that can apparently be quickly diluted by breeding outside of itself. How interesting that the families of the power elite do the same today. He continues, they are the same bloodlines, the royal divine bloodlines of ancient Sumer and Babylon, now Iraq, Egypt, and the Indus Valley, and elsewhere expanded into Europe to become the royal and aristocratic families that ruled that continent and most of the world throughout the British Empire and those of France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and so on. Down further, he says, as the people began to challenge and reject the open dictatorship of royal rule, the bloodlines began to move underground by operating among the population in all areas that control modern society. He also mentions that through the centuries, they have been working constantly to centralize global power and complete their great work, global dictatorship. This story is not a Masonic story, though Masonry plays a large role. Today, there is an ancient occult knowledge passed down from ancient Sumer, Babylon, and Egypt, perpetuated by secret societies, as Manly P. Hall noted, that go back to the Gnostics, the Kabbalists, the Cathars, Knights Templar, Hermeticists, Rosicrucians, the Illuminati, Freemasonry, and the Jesuits. It's regulated by various rites and rituals, concealed in secrecy, veiled in allegory, and hidden in plain sight, by various symbols, which is why you see the symbology everywhere today and throughout history. As 33rd degree Albert Pike puts it in Morals and Dogma, page 534, he says, the symbols of the wise always become the idols of the ignorant multitude. What the chiefs of the order really believed and taught is indicated to the adepts by the hints contained in the high degrees of Freemasonry and by the symbols which only the adepts understand. Are the uninitiated public at large or Masons of low degrees expected to understand them? Well, let's let Pike continue. All the blue degrees are but the outer court of the portico of the temple. Part of the symbols are displayed there to the initiate, but he is intentionally misled by false interpretations. It is not intended that he should understand them, but it is intended that he should imagine he understands them. Their true explication is reserved for the adepts, the princes of Masonry. The whole body of the royal and sacerdotal art was hidden so carefully centuries since in the high degrees as that it is even yet impossible to solve many of the enigmas which they contain. It is well enough for the masses of those called Masons to imagine that all of it is contained in the blue degrees, and whosoever attempts to undeceive them will labor in vain, and without any true reward, violate his obligations as an adept. Or as Manly P. Hall puts it in The Lost Keys of Freemasonry, says, the initiated brother realizes that his so-called symbols and rituals are merely blinds, fabricated by the wise to perpetuate ideas incomprehensible to the average individual. He also realizes that few Masons of today know or appreciate the mystic meaning concealed within these rituals. So what is the secret knowledge that needs to be so carefully concealed? Well, the secret knowledge, or the search for the lost word of Masonry, or the secret doctrine, or the legend of the third degree. This is the most important and significant of the legendary symbols of Freemasonry. It is to convey the idea that mankind can achieve godhood, and thereby it eternal life, through his own effort, albeit as an ascended master, or reaching cosmic Christ consciousness, which gets us into this idea of the New Age movement and ideas of transhumanism, transcendentalism, or being reincarnated as a higher self. Caretakers of the secret knowledge are the adepts, the sages, and with it, those who believe it, it gives them the divine right of kings to rule over the less important, unenlightened cattle and the useless eaters that make up the bulk of the human population, consuming resources, living longer, benefiting from technologies, growing exponentially larger, consuming ever diminishing resources. This is why the world population numbers need to be reduced, and thus a depopulation agenda is being developed. Inherent in the New World Order is this idea of a two-doctrine policy, essential to the success of all these orders throughout history. What is the two-doctrine policy? Before we get into that, stay up to date with everything Iconic by following us on all of our social media. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like our videos. To support us, you can go to patreon.com/theiconicpodcast and make a monthly pledge. You can also go to theiconiclabel.com and purchase a hat, a hoodie, or a t-shirt.